Tonight, in the narrow and strategically vital waters of the Strait of Hormuz, an event unfolded that challenges long-held assumptions about naval power, technological superiority, and the very nature of modern warfare. At precisely 2:38 a.m. Local time, a coordinated and highly sophisticated military operation began, one that would compress devastation, shock, and strategic upheaval into a span of just 17 minutes. What followed was not a conventional engagement, not a drawn-out naval battle, but a rapid and overwhelming demonstration of force that revealed how quickly the balance of power can shift when new technologies are applied with precision and scale. The opening moments were defined by simultaneity and speed. From multiple launch points along the southern coastline, a wave of hypersonic missiles surged into the night sky, their trajectories carefully calculated, their timing synchronized to the second. These were not isolated launches or experimental strikes. This was a deliberate saturation attack engineered to test and ultimately overwhelm one of the most advanced naval formations ever assembled. Within seconds, detection systems aboard the carrier strike group registered the launches. Radar screens lit up with incoming threats, and the quiet tension of routine operations transformed instantly into controlled urgency. Yet, even as detection occurred, a critical limitation became clear. The speed of the incoming weapons, traveling at velocities exceeding Mach 10 and beyond, compressed the decision-making window to an almost unmanageable degree. What might once have allowed minutes of response now offered barely more than a minute. Operators inside combat information centers faced a scenario that demanded near instantaneous judgment under extreme pressure. Every second carried weight, every command had consequences, and the margin for error had effectively disappeared. By 2:41 a.m., the situation had escalated from alarming to critical. Multiple high-speed contacts were converging from different vectors, their trajectories designed to complicate tracking and interception. The atmosphere inside the command spaces was intense but disciplined. Training took over, procedures were executed, and defensive systems were activated. Interceptor missiles were prepared, targeting solutions calculated, and communications relayed across the fleet. Yet beneath this structured response lay an emerging realization that the scale and velocity of the threat were unlike anything previously encountered. Then came the second wave, larger, more concentrated, and more lethal. This phase of the attack was not merely an extension of the first, but a calculated escalation. The missiles approached at varying altitudes and angles, some descending from high trajectories, while others skimmed lower, forcing defensive systems to divide their attention. This dual-profile assault created a layered challenge, one that strained even the most advanced radar and interception capabilities. Defensive missiles launched in rapid succession, streaking into the sky in an attempt to neutralize the incoming barrage. For a brief moment, the engagement became a race between detection, calculation, and interception. However, the defining characteristic of hypersonic weapons began to assert itself with unmistakable clarity. Their speed was not their only advantage. Their ability to maneuver unpredictably during the final phase of flight disrupted the mathematical certainty that traditional interception relies upon. Systems designed to calculate trajectories found themselves dealing with targets that refused to follow predictable paths. The result was a series of near misses, failed intercepts, and a growing sense that the defensive shield was being penetrated. At 2:48 a.m., the first impacts occurred. The transition from incoming threat to direct damage was abrupt and devastating. The kinetic energy alone, generated by objects traveling at such extraordinary speeds, produced effects that were both immediate and severe. The flight deck, engineered to withstand extreme conditions, was struck with a force that tore through its reinforced structure. Explosions followed, not isolated but cascading, as secondary systems and stored materials ignited. Fire and shock waves spread rapidly, creating a chain reaction that intensified with each passing second. Inside the vessel, the situation evolved into controlled chaos. Damage control teams moved swiftly, trained for precisely these kinds of emergencies, yet confronted with a scale and simultaneity that exceeded conventional expectations. Fires broke out across multiple compartments, and the coordination required to contain them became increasingly difficult as communication systems experienced disruption. The ship, designed as a resilient and layered defensive platform, was now facing a scenario where multiple layers were being compromised at once. As the minutes passed, the attack maintained its intensity. Additional waves ensured that recovery and stabilization efforts were continually interrupted. This was not simply about inflicting damage, but about preventing response. Each new impact compounded the previous one, creating conditions in which containment became progressively less feasible. The structural integrity of the vessel began to degrade, and systems critical to stability and operation were affected. By the time the final phase of the assault concluded, the cumulative effect was unmistakable. Fires continued to burn, flooding had begun to spread through lower sections, and the ability to coordinate a unified response had been significantly reduced. The sequence of events, compressed into less than 20 minutes, demonstrated how modern weapon systems can transform the tempo of conflict. What once might have unfolded over hours or days had now occurred in a fraction of that time. The broader implications of such an event extend beyond the immediate damage. They raise fundamental questions about the assumptions that underpin naval strategy. For decades, the concept of layered defense, mobility, and technological superiority has defined the operational framework of carrier strike groups. Yet, this encounter suggests that when confronted with sufficient speed, scale, and coordination, those layers can be challenged in ways that were previously theoretical. There's also a deeper technological narrative at play. The integration of different missile types, each with distinct flight profiles and capabilities, reflects a level of planning and execution that goes beyond isolated innovation. It indicates an understanding of how to exploit the limitations of defensive systems by presenting them with multiple simultaneous problems. This kind of operational design requires not only advanced hardware, but also sophisticated command and control structures capable of coordinating complex actions in real time. As the situation stabilized and the immediate threat subsided, attention inevitably turned to analysis. How did such a large-scale launch occur without earlier disruption? What specific factors limited the effectiveness of interception systems? How can detection and response frameworks be adapted to address threats that operate at such extreme velocities? These questions are not merely technical, they are strategic, shaping how future conflicts may be approached and how resources may be allocated. The psychological dimension is equally significant. Events of this nature have an impact that extends beyond physical damage. They challenge confidence, alter perceptions, and influence decision-making at the highest levels. The realization that advanced systems can be overwhelmed under certain conditions introduces a level of uncertainty that must be addressed. It is not simply about rebuilding capability, but about reassessing the assumptions that guide its use. In the context of global security, the implications ripple outward. Maritime routes, particularly those as critical as the Strait of Hormuz, are not just geographic features, but vital arteries of economic activity. Any event that calls into question the security of such routes carries consequences that extend into energy markets, international trade, and diplomatic relations. The interconnected nature of these systems means that a single incident can produce effects that are both immediate and far-reaching. What becomes evident through this unfolding narrative is that the character of warfare is continuing to evolve. Speed, once an advantage, is becoming a defining factor. The ability to compress time, to reduce reaction windows, and to overwhelm decision-making processes is reshaping how engagements are conducted. This does not render existing systems obsolete, but it does require adaptation, innovation, and a willingness to reconsider established doctrines. As we continue to examine the sequence of events, it becomes clear that this was not an isolated anomaly, but a reflection of broader trends in military technology and strategy. The convergence of hypersonic capabilities, advanced guidance systems, and coordinated operational planning represents a shift that cannot be ignored. It signals a future in which the margins for error are narrower, the pace of engagement is faster, and the consequences of miscalculation are more immediate. And so the story of this night is not confined to the details of a single engagement. It is part of a larger narrative about transformation, about the intersection of technology and strategy, and about the ongoing evolution of power in a complex and interconnected world. The first shockwave of the attack did not end when the missiles stopped arriving. In many ways, that was only the beginning of a much deeper crisis that unfolded across command centers, intelligence agencies, and political institutions thousands of kilometers away. As the Strait of Hormuz fell back into a tense and burning silence, the reality of what had just occurred began to fully register in layers, like an image slowly coming into focus after a violent flash of light. Information arrived in fragments, incomplete and fragmented, each update more difficult to accept than the last. Inside the United States' military command structure, the initial minutes after confirmation were defined by disbelief. Not confusion in the ordinary sense, but a deeper institutional hesitation, the kind that occurs when systems designed for predictability are confronted with an outcome they were never fully prepared to process. Reports streamed in from surviving escort vessels, each one describing similar scenes of overwhelming impact, structural failure, and rapid escalation of damage. At first, analysts attempted to reconcile these reports with existing threat models, but the scale and synchronization of the attack defied easy categorization. What made the situation particularly destabilizing was not only the loss itself, but the speed at which it had occurred. 17 minutes is an almost abstract time frame in naval warfare. It is shorter than a routine training cycle, shorter than many command decision loops, and certainly shorter than the time typically required for full strategic assessment. Yet, within that narrow window, a multi-billion-dollar carrier strike group had been fundamentally disrupted, and a key symbol of maritime dominance had been rendered inoperable. As confirmation solidified, the focus in Washington shifted rapidly from verification to response. The National Military Command Center became the central node of activity, absorbing streams of intelligence, satellite imagery, and operational updates. The atmosphere, according to later accounts, was not one of panic in the chaotic sense, but of compressed urgency, where every action felt delayed relative to the speed of events already in motion. Senior officers were forced to operate in a decision environment where historical precedent offered little guidance. One of the most difficult challenges was simply constructing a coherent operational picture. The engagement had unfolded so quickly and across such a wide spectrum of systems that even reconstructing the timeline required cross-referencing multiple sources. Radar data, electronic signals, visual confirmations, and intercepted communications all needed to be synchronized. But even as this process began, it became clear that the strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate tactical loss. The first major realization was that the engagement represented a shift in the relationship between offensive and defensive systems. For decades, naval doctrine had assumed that layered defense, when properly executed, could absorb and neutralize most conventional threats. The events in the Strait of Hormuz demonstrated a scenario in which that assumption was no longer reliable under certain conditions. The combination of speed, saturation, and maneuverability had created a form of pressure that compressed reaction cycles beyond effective thresholds. As analysts worked through the data, attention turned to the structure of the attack itself. It was not a single wave, but a carefully sequenced operation designed to maintain continuous pressure. The initial phase had force detection and reaction. The second phase had targeted interception capacity. The final phase had ensured that recovery and reorganization were not possible within the same operational window. This layered structure revealed a level of planning that emphasized systemic disruption rather than isolated destruction. At the same time, political leadership was being drawn into the situation at an unprecedented pace. The activation of the highest levels of government occurred in parallel with ongoing military assessments. Situation rooms were filled, secure communications channels were opened, and allied consultations were initiated. Yet, even as information flowed, clarity remained elusive. The gap between the speed of the event and the speed of comprehension had created a temporary imbalance in decision-making. One of the most significant early political challenges was managing the flow of information to the public. In the immediate aftermath, official statements were deliberately cautious, reflecting the uncertainty surrounding casualty figures, structural status, and ongoing operational risks. This caution, however, created its own set of consequences. In the absence of clear confirmation, speculation filled the vacuum, amplifying global attention and increasing pressure on decision makers to respond more decisively. Internationally, the reaction was immediate and multidimensional. Allies expressed concern not only for the loss itself, but for what it suggested about the evolving nature of maritime security. For many partner nations, particularly those reliant on sea lanes for energy and trade, the implications were profound. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a regional waterway. It is a critical artery of global economic stability. Any disruption in its security reverberates across markets, supply chains, and diplomatic frameworks. Within hours, financial systems began to reflect this uncertainty. Energy markets reacted sharply, with volatility increasing as traders attempted to price in the risk of sustained instability. Insurance premiums for maritime transit in the region rose rapidly, and shipping routes began to adjust in real time. These economic reactions were not secondary effects, they were immediate extensions of the strategic shock. Meanwhile, intelligence agencies across multiple countries began independent assessments of the capabilities demonstrated in the attack. The focus was not only on the specific weapons used, but on the coordination required to deploy them at scale. The synchronization of hundreds of high-speed systems suggested a level of command and control infrastructure that demanded closer examination. Questions emerged regarding launch detection, communication resilience, and the potential for similar tactics to be replicated in other theaters. As these analyses progressed, a broader strategic question began to take shape. If a carrier strike group could be disrupted under these conditions, what did that imply for other high-value naval assets operating in contested environments? The implications extended beyond a single engagement and into the core architecture of modern naval deployment. Carrier groups had long been considered the cornerstone of power projection, but this event forced a reassessment of their vulnerability in environments where hypersonic systems could be deployed at scale. Within military planning circles, this led to immediate discussions about adaptation. Concepts that had previously been theoretical, such as distributed maritime operations, increased reliance on unmanned systems, and enhanced missile defense layering, began to move toward accelerated development timelines. The emphasis shifted from optimizing existing platforms to rethinking structural assumptions about naval engagement. At the same time, technical analysis of the defensive failure became a priority. Early assessments indicated that the challenge was not a single point of failure, but a convergence of limitations. Detection systems were operating within expected parameters, but the speed of incoming threats compressed engagement windows beyond optimal interception thresholds. Interceptor systems performed as designed, but their effectiveness was reduced by the maneuvering profiles of incoming missiles. Coordination systems functioned under extreme pressure, but the volume of simultaneous targets created prioritization challenges. This convergence revealed a fundamental characteristic of modern high-speed warfare. It is not enough for individual systems to perform effectively in isolation. The entire network must be capable of adapting dynamically to compressed timelines and multi-vector threats. The failure, therefore, was not purely technological, but systemic. As days passed and initial shock gave way to structured analysis, attention began to shift toward long-term implications. Military planners, policymakers, and strategists increasingly recognized that this event represented more than a single operational loss. It represented a transition point in the evolution of maritime warfare. Just as previous eras had been defined by the transition from sail to steam or from gun-based artillery to missile systems, this moment marked the emergence of a new paradigm defined by hypersonic speed and network saturation. One of the most significant consequences of this shift is the changing definition of deterrence. Historically, deterrence has relied on the assumption of survivability and retaliation capacity. But when engagement windows shrink to minutes or seconds, and when high-value assets can be neutralized before full response cycles activate, the structure of deterrence itself must evolve. This creates a strategic environment where prevention, detection, and dispersion become more important than reactive strength. In parallel, global naval doctrine began to reflect a growing emphasis on redundancy and decentralization. Rather than concentrating power into a limited number of high-value platforms, emerging strategies explore the distribution of capability across larger numbers of smaller, more flexible units. This shift is not simply tactical, it is philosophical. It reflects a move away from concentrated dominance toward resilient adaptability. As the strategic community continued to analyze the event, another dimension emerged: psychological impact. Military history has repeatedly shown that perception can be as influential as material capability. The imagery associated with the Strait of Hormuz engagement carried symbolic weight that extended far beyond the immediate tactical outcome. It challenged assumptions about invulnerability, disrupted long-held narratives of technological supremacy, and introduced uncertainty into frameworks that had previously been considered stable. This psychological dimension influenced not only military planning, but also diplomatic engagement. Allies sought reassurances, adversaries reassessed calculations, and neutral states observed closely for signs of broader shifts in balance. In this environment, information itself became a strategic asset, carefully managed and interpreted through multiple lenses. As reconstruction of the engagement continued, attention also turned to lessons learned. The most immediate of these was the importance of adaptability in system design. Static defense models, no matter how advanced, are increasingly vulnerable to dynamic, multi-layered threats. Future systems will likely require greater autonomy, faster processing cycles, and deeper integration between detection, decision, and response mechanisms. Another lesson involved the importance of temporal awareness in warfare. The compression of engagement timelines fundamentally alters the nature of command authority. Decisions that once required hierarchical approval structures may now need to be delegated closer to the point of contact. This raises complex questions about control, accountability, and trust in automated systems. As the analysis deepened, it became clear that the Strait of Hormuz engagement would not be viewed in isolation. It would be studied as a case study in transition, a moment where existing paradigms were stress tested under extreme conditions and found to require significant evolution. Military academies, strategic institutions, and defense organizations around the world would likely dissect its details for years to come. Ultimately, what emerged from this event was not only a record of destruction, but a catalyst for transformation. It accelerated debates that had already begun, exposed vulnerabilities that had been theorized but not fully acknowledged, and forced a global reassessment of how power is projected and defended in the modern era. The Strait of Hormuz remains a narrow waterway, but its significance has expanded far beyond geography. It has become a reference point in the evolving story of technological warfare, a moment where speed, coordination, and precision converged to produce outcomes that challenge established understanding. And as analysis continues, one conclusion becomes increasingly difficult to avoid. The nature of conflict itself is changing, and those changes are unfolding faster than the systems designed to contain them.